Welcome to the Exodus Companies podcast. My name is Jared. I'm the CEO and founder of the Exodus Companies. This is a movement from culture to build community. I've been very fortunate over the years to build some solid friendships in the industry that my company exists in, and largely we've existed inside of the firearms industry. I know that that can bring some negative connotations to people. People can have some predispositions about what that means. But the industry is vast, and there's this huge array of friends that I've created and a network that I've created within it. And that's ultimately built out even further than the firearms industry and has overflowed into many different surrounding industries as well. And I've been very fortunate with the people that I have met along the journey of starting my business. And my friend Mick has been one of those friends that has been sort of a staple in our group, someone that I've been able to rely upon for information. I've gotten into arguments with him from time to time because we don't always see perfectly eye to eye, but Mick is one of those guys that is extremely analytical and very precise about his positions, but also willing to adapt and change his positions over time based on information and a logical approach to the world around him. And he usually brings an interesting and unique perspective to all of these charged topics that we will see in the world around us. And what I like most about Mick is the fact that he's extremely down to earth, very fun and energetic, and can be hilarious at times to hang out with. But at the end of the day, he can turn on this knowledge switch and be able to present topics, especially in the fighting skills arena, learning how to shoot firearms and pistols and rifles and things like that in a very logical and clear way. And so what we're going to be talking about today on this episode is culture surrounding our nation, some of the things that we are identifying in our culture, how to become better within that culture, and how we can impact people around us and ultimately live a better life and have a life of impact for the people around us. So that's it for now. Let's dive into that.
Something happens, it has to eat the picture.
Okay.
Yeah, it's trained. So you train them from bird.
Is that?
and then once, and then there's
I don't even know where this is going already.
Then there's a small cyanide capsule it has to eat.
That's right on.
Yeah.
Right where it needs to be, there's a capsule. Nice. Mm-hmm. That's good, Mick. That's cool. That's fun. I don't even know where to go from here.
It's your show, pal.
Well, Mick, thanks for coming out and saying hello and hanging out with us. Where did you just travel from? You just kind of gave me a rundown.
Well, I came from home, which is near Chicago, but what is today? Tuesday. So I think I got home Friday from Washington State. So I just did 4,832 miles home to Washington, to Idaho, to Montana, to Colorado, to Utah, to a few other spots, and then recocked the trailer and came to visit with my TA Target family.
Yeah, you mentioned it was almost 5,000 miles, and I was like, holy cow.
Well, now I'm at 5,000 for like 10 days because when I think I'm 8 to home from here.
It's crazy. Mm-hmm. So I have a couple friends that do something similar to you. I want you to kind of go into what you do.
They tell dick jokes and travel around?
Possibly, not
quite
really
as
much
quick,
as you do.
I have to interrupt you on your show. What is allowed and not allowed so that you guys don't have to edit me? I don't want to be offending you or your audience.
I don't even know.
Like if
how far do we go, boys?
Well, no, for real. I mean, I know you guys are good, God-fearing folk here.
Keep it a 6 out of 10. I don't know what that means.
So say not.
See, that's worse.
Yeah, isn't it like weird when you say? Now I'm just giving you guys a bunch of stuff to edit. I'm looking at him off camera trying to keep it straight.
I don't even know if we should restart.
We'll stop. I'm totally serious now.
But anyway, so people that travel like you do, it blows my mind because you end up going thousands of miles. You teach courses that could be 5 days, 6 days, and then you're like back on the road and doing it again. And the only thing I can kind of compare in my life, I taught motorcycle courses for years.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it was with the motorcycle safety program. It's like a state thing with Pennsylvania, and it's a way for people to, at either no cost or very, very little cost, I forget what it costs for someone to do it, but you could go get your motorcycle license, get some extra training, save some money on insurance because you went through this like sanctioned training program.
What is it, like a day or two?
It depended. So we usually had 2 classroom days and then 2 what would equate to like a range day. It was on a parking lot. So like we would have schools and we'd have schools that worked with the program that would essentially have courses marked out in chalk and like spots. It actually was this like vast array of like dots and shapes and then we had handbooks that we had to memorize where we'd put like cones places for different drills. So it's actually funny because it's very, very similar to what the firearms industry does with training with firearms. And I would say it mostly resembles like beginner classes for shooting where you'd start slow, start with some foundational things, stuff that a lot of riders would come out onto the course and think, oh, I'm good. I don't need it. It's always so the funniest part was it was always like the dude that shows up with his wife or girlfriend who he's all like cocky on this big Harley or something. And then he was the one to dump it, but his wife was like ripping around. Paid attention to what the foundational skills were. She like built that foundation and she would just be ripping everywhere. But it reminds me of that. So I have a small taste of probably what that's like to be out on the hot sun on the macadam, days in a row, but I just didn't have to travel quite as much.
It's interesting your comparison because I compare motorcycle stuff to firearms all the time. And another comparison is everybody should go do those things like train with a gun or train to ride a motorcycle and they don't. And like the amount of accidents that happen every year, like talk to any fireman or paramedic anywhere. And they're like, oh, yeah, 10 times a week in the summertime, we peel somebody off a tree or off the hood of a car. But that's, it's interesting.
I kind of equate it. You and I were on the phone the other day, and I mentioned about how I cringe with people not wearing safety glasses when they're shooting. It's the same thing when I see someone riding without a helmet, because I've wracked a lot on just being a total.
What kind of riding did you
goof.
do? Were you on like a sport bike?
No, I never got into sport bikes. I had like the baby step below it. I had supermotos, so they were like a dirt bike with sport bike wheels and tires.
Cool. Yeah.
They were fun. I mean, the problem is it's super easy to just act like a hooligan and act like a goofball and do 100 miles an hour. Like they wouldn't do 200 miles an hour like a sport bike.
But you go from 0 to 100 in a half a second.
Go fast and you can do wheelies and you're tempted to run from people you shouldn't run from and all this other stuff. But we wrecked. Ethan and I rode for years and years and years and had our fair share of getting knocked off of crap, but always had on the riding jackets, the gloves, the helmet, the boots. So like we would walk away from it. Now it's not a guarantee that you're going to walk away from anything wearing safety gear, but at the same time, just like I see in the firearms industry, people like negating the safety gear. I look at the motorcycle world and both make me cringe because it's super easy to just take that one step and wear the safety glasses or wear the hearing protection.
Yeah.
My
friend Todd Fox talks about that. He is a SWAT cop, was a Marine, and he does executive protection for like huge famous rock bands and stuff like that. And he does some training and he talks about this phenomenon of because something's never happened or hasn't happened yet, like thus it will never happen. Right. We get this mindset, like I've never crashed my bike until you do. One of my fireman buddies, I remember telling me, it must have been 2 years ago, some guy every day in the warm months for like 20 years would ride his bike from his home to the train station and then the train station to work, just a little 5-minute ride and never had a problem until one day he pulled out and somebody was looking down and they sideswiped him and killed him. Like never had a problem. He had no helmet on, was part of that story. But we get so comfortable that just I've got these cheap eye protection, or we're going to shoot steel this week. And my document that we send people says must have wraparound, right? ANSI rated, blah, 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 all the specific terminology, eye protection. And they're like, oh, well, I don't have any. All I have is my prescription lenses, but they're safety rated lenses. Cool. But are they wraparound?
Right.
Like, no, like you're willing to risk your eyesight to screw around and shoot guns for a couple hours. Well, nothing's bad. I do it all the time. You can until a little chunk of brass or steel or dirt rips your cornea open.
Yep.
And then I have to hear about it.
Then you, I think
which has never happened. But
that sort of, I don't know, that kind of depicts a lot of that culture, being comfortable, being complacent, getting into a groove and just thinking bad things don't happen to you. But everything bad that's ever happened to me has always been like that. Things are perfectly fine and then they're not. And I don't know.
The hunter safety program, like the motorcycle program. You guys all done hunter safety program?
Yeah.
Like, what do you do when you're going to climb over a fence and you've got your shotgun or your rifle? What do you do?
They tell you to take it off, unload it.
Right. Yeah. Unload the shotgun or the rifle. I have a second cousin that blew his head off in northern Wisconsin. I was not alive. The proverbial step over the fence and something happened and he blew his brains out. And you're like, how did you do that? To this day, I, in the woods, unload my gun. It's like, I know I don't need to unload this gun. I know I can just step over this thing, but it's like, why don't I just unload it? And but they tell that stuff to people, but then even I know somebody that blew their head off. And of course it wasn't the fence. Like, can I put the safety on or even clear the chamber and keep the magazine loaded, whatever. Yeah. Or hand it to you on the other side of the fence, whatever it is.
Well, no, in several communist states, that would be an illegal transfer of your firearm.
There you go.
We can't do that.
But we have these stories that are almost like folklore.
Yeah.
Like you guys all knew the answer because you were all told it in your hunter safety program, even though we're from different states, but people still don't do it. People fall out of tree stands every year. People shoot their brother or kid because they saw movement in the trees, like these very stupid things, and people get really complacent with dangerous stuff.
Where's the limit? And let me explain kind of where I'm going with that. I see two lenses. So I'm just diving into that part of the conversation real quick, where I see value in being able to navigate terrain with a rifle.
Sure.
And yet at the same time, you're balancing safety in a situation like that. And my question that I wrestle with sometimes is it because people never expose themselves to a situation in a safe manner that they don't have the skill to climb the fence with the rifle?
Sure.
And that's where, our followers on TA Targets will, if I post something like that, you'll have a percent that'll push back and be like, he should be able to climb that fence with his rifle.
Sure.
And I think that's a fair
I think
statement.
You totally should be able to climb the fence with the rifle.
Yeah. So do you think it's just ignorance and that leads to a combination of things that then ultimately...
Most people don't do what we do with guns.
Yeah.
Right? So we're an anomaly. I was listening to a conversation last night with 4 guys, all special operations dudes. And they were having the conversation that we've heard a million times about people like us, you especially, with the nods and all that stuff and high-end NFA guns and all that stuff. I don't have any of those cool things, but it's we're trained and you're not. And it's well, no, I'm trained to do different things. I don't know shit about fast roping out of a helicopter, but I'll shoot some foxes in the backyard if I have to, or whatever.
I like to ride my mountain bike with my nods. It's how do you learn how to operate with night vision? It's you just do the normal crap. You know what I mean? It's the same rep.
Stop it, honey. I'm making a milkshake with the lights off.
But it's the same repetitive, basic things. People think that you have to go do this high speed stuff with cool gear.
You just get used to moving about.
It's can you, I don't know, open your backpack with your binocular night vision on? It's well, yeah, you can. You just have to do it. So that is interesting. I think that exists in every industry. I often found myself, and you're in the gun space, I'm in the gun space too, but every single space that I've ever analyzed, there's always sort of this fight between the professional and the hobby. I think the gun industry has more, maybe in some ways, because I think that the professional has a higher level of risk and a higher level of...
When we say professional, do we mean you professionally build targets, I professionally teach people to shoot, or do you mean somebody that puts a gun on and goes and kicks a door down with a felon on the other side of it?
I think that I would probably say, if you're segmenting it, which I hate it so much. I hate the whole citizen and military law enforcement, because at the end of the day, we're all citizens of the United States. So I think it's kind of this weird thing to be oh, I'm a citizen and you're a soldier, when at the end of the day, this republic is built by us, the citizens. We're all citizens. However, if you had to segment it, I would say military, LEO, often by most people in the gun world are viewed as the professionals. And then the citizens are more of the hobbyists. You know what I mean? So that's kind of how I would...
Although most people you and I know will shoot those people just in raw shooting performance, especially some people we know that are really high-level competitive shooters. But the conversation those guys were having last night, none of those guys are tasked with shooting USPSA stages or PRS rifle course. They're fighting with guns where people are trying to kill them, and maybe they got communication issues and medical issues and transportation issues and all those kinds of things that are, if we just separate out the gun play, that's a different animal in itself.
And that's why I think it gets a lot more heated because, you know, I rode dirt bikes for years too. I would go to some motocross tracks. I was never very good, but I loved it. But you didn't quite have like somebody who had the best bike or gear or experience or whatever necessarily looking down on the dude who's just a hobbyist. There was still some polarization in certain industries, but I just think there's a different dynamic in the gun world, and it's also based around a human right. So that adds a whole other layer of misunderstanding by a lot of our populace who don't even grasp the fact that it's a natural right that we have. So there's oftentimes, in my opinion, not even enough weight on the citizen populace side, the regular people, the non-operator side, where we don't even necessarily understand the right to own the firearms that we have, and it's viewed more as a privilege, you know? And I hear that a lot. Like, we have the privilege to own a gun, and it kind of makes me turn a little bit inside because I'm like, well, we didn't really lay out a privilege.
I mean, we're privileged that there were smart people that codified this in a constitution as a right. Like, I feel privileged that men did that, but yeah, it ain't a privilege.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that
leave me alone.
There's a lot of confusion there. And so this is a funny kind of story that made me realize that my companies sort of existed in an echo chamber, which I knew. We all know that you kind of build a following, and the people that follow you tend to be the people that want to consume your content. And yes, they'll share the things that, you know, they think is worthy of sharing and their friends might follow, but you kind of build an echo chamber. So probably a month ago, we released some Facebook ads, which we really hadn't done in the past too much, because anytime you show like shooting and like any reloads or anything, like Facebook goes, holy cow, tactical. No, can't have it. Well, we just did, the term's weird, but like ASMR setup, essentially just like really clean audio, setting up the targets and showing bullet impacts. But that was it. Nothing crazy, nothing fancy. But what I realized is that the following on Facebook was vastly different than what we have on Instagram, or even, as much as it hurts me inside to say, TikTok, which I hate. So TikTok
was it like
so
old
much.
Dudes that were like, shooting steel's highly dangerous?
We had the gamut. So we had people that said, steel's dangerous, your steel's too expensive, shouldn't shoot guns like that. I'm talking like everything you could ever think of.
It's very irritating sometimes.
Well, what was irritating to me is, I guess I didn't realize, like, I thought we were making so much progress with the conversation around guns. And I think we are, because you see court cases and precedents as being precedents for our rights expanding. We see that. But then you see something like that on Facebook and you're like, whoa,
sure.
Are we actually progressing, or do we just have enough people who have influence or who are actually interpreting the Constitution in the proper way, say through the courts? Is it just a select few, or are we actually expanding understanding and rights? And I'm curious what you think about that.
So the question is, I think pretty clear. I guess it depends on where you go, right? Yeah. So that echo chamber, that's a scary thing because we all like to live in there. Gary Sharon, I think is his name. You guys remember a little band called Van Halen? So Van Halen had 3 singers, right? The third one was Sharon. I think he's from out this way. I think he's like a New Jersey guy. Doesn't matter. People didn't like him because you had 2 other singers before that recorded all their big albums, and then he just came in and was like this dude. He was in a band, and this isn't about music, but he was in another band that he made like a couple #1 hits. And like in that world, he wouldn't be like looked at as like Michael Jackson or Madonna or some huge star, but he still had like #1 hits and traveled around the world and was playing on huge stages. Like he had made it. He wasn't in like a little bar playing with his acoustic guitar. And so he's being interviewed. I don't even know how I came upon this, but he's being interviewed kind of like we're doing. And somebody's talking about the interviewer, like about how people pushed back when Van Halen hired him. And he's like, you know what's stupid? I could step back and say I've got records that have sold millions of copies, traveled the world. People say, I love you. And he was a great singer. Oh, you're a great singer. You're a great musician. You're a great songwriter. And then one person is like, you suck. And you lay in bed at night and you're just like, oh my God, I suck. What the hell? Right. And like you just fixate on it. So I guess my point in bringing up that story is there is always going to be people that disagree. And it's really easy to live in that echo chamber world too. I try to walk that line. Like I find it not challenging in the sense of I want to prove you wrong, but like, let's have a conversation if you disagree. For example, out here in New Hampshire right now, not out, when I say out here, I live 800 miles west. I forgot the guy's name, but some dude started like an illegal gun range. He's got physical structures on it. Neighbors get pissed. He's got no zoning. And so this kind of brings up a discussion pertaining to like rights and things like that. To the point now where he is being ordered to tear down the structures or I think be arrested and stop shooting. Yeah. So there's a big YouTuber that shares this who's like, he only deals in like 2A legal stuff. And I watched it, and his version is, here's a guy on his private property and a judge is going to order him to destroy his property over a 2A thing. So I'm like, well, what's the story? I go research the guy. No, for like 5 years, he violated all these local little town ordinances, like put a road in that wasn't allowed, that like circumvented something on the property. He's dumping lead into waterways, like just all kinds of stuff that like it accumulated into this. So I just wrote a comment. I should have said nothing, but so I was a Second Amendment advocate in my community. I was the president of the Right to Carry Association. I was the vice chair of a political party helping to elect people to office. That my goal was people that wanted to defend the Constitution. So I've got a little bit of a background where I understand some of the stuff. So it reminded me of a case in my county where a guy built a range. The county kind of dirtily changed some property near this guy's house to environmentally protected lands, basically, which meant that you can't fire a gun on or towards it. So they like created this like hard line. It's like, well, that's kind of crappy, but they did it and it's law. So now he was pissing all of his neighbors off. He killed his neighbor's dog that like was eating his chickens. So like people hated this guy, which is all kind of like weird facts, but it all came about because he built a shooting range without proper zoning. So that by our laws, by the Constitution of the state of Illinois, my community had the right to go like levy fines against him and basically shut him down. So I just said it reminded me of that case, and it could have all been alleviated had this guy followed proper protocols. Probably could have been alleviated if he had been a good neighbor and like talked to his neighbors and just like had some defined shooting times. Instead, it turned into big legal battle. So this guy sees my comment. And he's like, "You're an idiot. Apparently you don't understand anything." And I'm like, "Well, actually, I read the whole case. It's in the Supreme Court of the state out there of New Hampshire. And like, it's pretty cut and dry, but this guy just wants to argue. And so I'm like, dude, like, I think we're like agreeing, like we both understand that this really isn't a Second Amendment case. It's a zoning case, but you don't like the way I described it. Like, you're not from here. Okay. But like, I can see it's a zoning issue. Yeah. So he just wants to keep arguing about that. Are we like, if I met this guy in a coffee shop or at like a hunting camp, we'd probably be buds. But because there's this one thing that he's super passionate about that I don't describe just as he sees fit, he just wants to be my enemy over it. So I think it's a strange thing how we choose to communicate. You and I disagree all the time on stuff. And
I still like you, by the way.
Sure. And that's the weird thing. Like, it would be weird if everybody around you were just like, "That's a perfect shirt. I love it." And
Right.
Wow, your haircut looks great. And that new set of tires you bought, good choice. I love those tires. Like that would just be weird.
It would be.
Yeah. Like, hey, why'd you buy those? Those other tires are better as far as I'm concerned. Well, I don't know. I've had them 3 times. You just had them once. Maybe you should listen to me. And then you communicate and we learn things. And so that echo chamber thing is weird. Right now I'm being told I'm racist all over the internet because I shared a video that 2 people of different skin melanin contents got in a fight, and I'm racist because I shared that. And the comment that I shared with the post, a dude's in the wrong movie theater seat. You know, nowadays you go to the movie theater, unlike in days of old, and you just found a seat. Now they're like, what seat do you want? Yeah. You ever go to a theater lately?
I haven't for a long time, but
that's like how a lot of them work. And so and it was an older gentleman. So to him, and the theater's like 2/3 empty, but to him, like it says seat 1F. So you're in my seat. He could have sat anywhere.
Yeah.
So they get in an altercation. The guy sitting there beats him up. So, and then he flees. And so people are like, I'm racist. Well, wait, I didn't do this, nor did I write anything bad about the man's skin color. I just wrote that we should have an understanding that we're not sure of what level of violence somebody's willing to go to over what we think is meaningless or stupid. And so then the comments matriculated into, that's what comes here on this guy's page is all like this. And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? and so then to your point, and I'll shut up, then I start thinking like, is this what people think? Like, and then you get some people like, F you, that's not true. Like that's never the case. And then other people like, I see it here all the time. And I'm like, you're here all the time seeing this. And I didn't argue this, but like, can you show me a bunch of cases where I'm providing racist content? And then why are you following this page if you feel it?
Brenton or Josh, put some Jason Aldean right here over top of me.
I mean,
try that in a small town, Mick.
I just heard, what's his name? The running for president. Which Kennedy is it? Robert Jr.
RFK, yeah.
Like he is now being attacked as racist to try to, but he said, I have never said a racist thing in my life. He said before Congress the other day, I never have had a racist thought. And I'm like, now you're being an idiot. Like if somebody looks at the totality of your entire life, somebody could be like, okay, that one thing there, that's a little racist, bro. I mean, everybody says and does something that could be deep, but if you're like I've never had a sinful thought in my life, or I've never lusted after a woman or thought I'd like to take that guy's car or whatever. Now you're just full of crap.
Yeah. You're just ignoring somewhat of human nature. And also the ability to say what's on your mind too. Yeah. Like there's an aspect when I look at like what RFK was getting at, he's sharing.
You heard him talking.
Oh yeah. RFK was mentioning about like COVID mortality and different, ethnicity groups and how it was affecting certain ones more than others and how it could have been targeted. And to me, when I listen to that, when I hear people freaking out about something, I dig into it and I try to just listen to what the person said. Because what I heard was him just saying, here's what I'm analyzing. This is data. This is printed. I can show you this.
I'm not even offering you my opinion.
Right.
We're just looking.
It's just, here's the thing.
Right.
And I'm like, man, some of our culture is so out of whack with, to your point, not even being able to disagree, but then go along with our day. Now, I would argue one thing, and I'm curious what you think about this. I think that more people...
I agree.
There we go. Podcast done. I think there's more sane people out there than we realize. Sane. I think that there are more people that can disagree with you, but be okay with that, live our own lives, maybe learn from each other than those that are loud and obnoxious and screaming off the hill. Like I think media and the politicians in general like to capitalize on the thing that gets everybody kind of pissed off and triggered. It makes good news. It makes
sales and marketing, man.
Yeah, it makes great headlines. It makes everybody in an uproar. And quite frankly, when we have people that are sort of opposing each other and we're saying it's me against you, you get their attention.
Yeah.
And I just, in my experience in the world around me, like real world, not media world, not social media, I don't have those issues with people. You know what I mean? I don't have
you're
people
not having friction with
the
guy at the gas station.
Exactly. Except when I wear my CarryTrainer shirt. But I expect that when
you've got that racist shirt on.
Yeah. That guy that said that thing. But I don't experience that. And I think that if people act like they experience that, one, they either live in a really crappy area and probably should move, or they're just not that good of a person. Like they are bringing upon themselves all of this junk because of how they're living or how they're acting. But I do think that there's a shift occurring in one sense, I would say, because for a period of time, going back to what you were saying about you being called racist, there actually used to be a little bit of power behind that. There was a period of time where people were actually really scared of being canceled. They're really scared of having someone insinuate that they are racist because they said a thing.
It doesn't feel good, but I know I'm not, so I was just like, piss off. You know, I'm not going to.
But there was a point where I saw it in late 2000s, I guess, where if there was a person, a company, a page that somebody said, you're racist, you would have all the trolls on you. You would have people reporting your page left and right. You'd have 1,000 comments of people bashing you, telling you they want to kill you, giving you all the most disgusting parts of the internet would end up coming onto your page like cancer. And anymore, what I found, we've had people say things to us like, you are this certain way or this certain thing, or you're just whatever, you name it.
Like your company is.
Yeah,
like
but
your
like
culture
what can they do? Because ultimately I'm going to show up tomorrow and say the thing that I believe tomorrow. And so ultimately, what power do they actually have? And I think there's a lot of people, especially over the last 3 years, sort of waking up to the fact that, one, you have the freedom to say your mind. You can give your piece. Now, there could be consequences depending on what that piece is and how you portray that to people. Not being mature, not being respectful could lead to someone hitting you or doing something dumb to you. Like, of course. But we have that right to say our piece and move along with our day. And I think people are starting to realize that there's a power in speaking truth. There's a power in saying what you mean respectfully and not backing down the moment that someone says, oh, Mick, you're racist. You know what I mean? And there was a time where I saw that. As soon as somebody insinuated anything, it could be they're a bigot or they're a homophobe or they're, whatever thing that people like to throw around.
Isn't that downstairs on TA Targets like your mission statement? Isn't that like the wall mission statement?
Right. Everything. Yeah, that's what we are. No, that's Arcane. Targets is the target company.
That is nothing new.
Yeah.
All of these things. Human beings, somebody the other day told me race is made up. Like, yes, we're all humans. Like a lab is a lab and a Malamute's a Malamute. They're both still dogs. They just look different. But like even that idea is like, no, I've got a sister-in-law from Uganda. She has got a different culture. They look different. They're different than somebody that lives in Alaska that is an indigenous person, or Chile, or a freaking Polynesian island. I don't know. Like, we are all still humans, but we have different characteristics and different cultures. But it's this idea that the RFK thing, I've got family that was so angry because I traveled through the COVID times and worked. And those were the people pushing vaccines and that kind of stuff. And now there's not a conversation of, hey, I'm sorry I said that you were a murderer,
right?
Or wrote on the internet as your blood that you were like going to be responsible for 1 million people dead. Literally, I had a family member say that about me. And it's like, I love you. Go to hell and I'll see you at Christmas. Right. But do you think that person comes back now and says, hey, maybe I overreacted? No, I had to base what I was doing on the science. And not to talk about COVID per se, but we are flighty, simple-minded little creatures that social media, is a perfect example of how we just scroll from one dopamine hit to the next. Porn, click the next page, click the next page, click the next page. And it's our nature to do that. we have to understand that and make better choices. It's not new. I heard those 4 guys I brought up earlier talking, and one of them said, I don't think in this community we can talk anymore. And I'm like, what are you talking about? When could we? Unless it was 2 people that were intelligent and caring enough about each other. I remember hearing stories of Jeff Cooper, who's one of the like founders of modern shooting and like shooting schools and all of this. And I think it was Mass Ayub. Maybe they were butting heads, and they were both what people would call friendly. But I heard a story of how they were like, his way's bad, my way's good. And this is in the 1970s, late 60s, maybe even into the 80s. Like, this is macho dudes doing macho dude shit. Your steel sucks, mine's good. And look at this guy shoots my steel. That guy doesn't shoot your steel. And my guy served in this unit, yours didn't. Yeah. Like I think we still do that. I mean, we've always done that.
Right. And I think that's something that can be forgotten. I think that some of it, though, too, I think it ebbs and flows because, I mean, culture's shifting in different directions, I think, all the time. We go to certain radical ends and then we swing back. And I think of it in my head, whether I'm right or wrong about this, I feel it as though it's a pendulum where, you took the COVID era, we swung the pendulum hard one direction.
Yeah.
We almost found ourselves, in some states did find themselves in sort of a totalitarian existence, maybe not to that extent, but it was certainly headed that direction. But often the thing that I analyze and I hope that I see, there's a danger in this, but that pendulum does come back. Like maybe that taste of totalitarianism was enough, and I know it to be a fact that it was enough for a lot of people that it can start to swing back in the proper direction. Now, the hard part is as culture shifts in one direction, it can also go very far. And, you brought up like the zoning thing. There's things that make me boil sometimes. And I think some of it is my age and upbringing and some of the culture that I was raised up in. Some of it is just, I have a tendency to like want to prove things wrong or prove myself or be against the grain sometimes. It's like ingrained in me. Like you said, don't do that. Don't drive your motorcycle fast. Cool. I'm going really fast now and I'm doing wheelies and I'm doing this other thing. So there's this balance there. But there's a fear that I have that when you swing a pendulum, that it goes really far to one end. And if I look at sort of our structures of governments on a scale where I'd be like anarchy and like Marxism and totalitarianism over here, like it scares me almost as much, quite frankly, when things go too far towards just total anarchy and people just...
Dude, I was just in Washington. You pass cities of tents and tarps and plywood and burned cars and people naked in the street, people having sex in the street. There's a tree in Olympia, Washington, the capital of the city, full of beautiful historic buildings, the capital of the state. Beautiful little Italian restaurant I visit when I'm out there, and I only will stop if I can park in front of the place because your car probably is going to get the windows busted out. And there's a tree that it looks like a decoration. There are hypodermic needles stuck up the bark, the whole tree. I mean, it looks like some kind of modern weird art, It's just a tree where you shoot yourself and then jam your needle into the tree.
Don't touch any of those needles.
8,000 needles stuck in this tree, right? Like, that's freaking... That's the pendulum to one side.
Right.
Yeah,
that's sort of terrifying. And it's why over the last 3 years, it became evident to me that there should be something that our business does to speak, yes, to what is sort of viewed as a radical idea of liberty, but also what that responsible management is of that liberty, that it's not this total anarchy, do whatever you want. I mean, a lot of us like to think that that's what that means, that I can just go do me and do whatever I want, whenever I want.
I'm gonna light a bonfire in the middle of the street.
Right.
Yeah.
And
which people are doing right now.
And I think there's we're in a dangerous position on some sides, or in some spaces, I should say, some places, locations where I feel like that's shifting really fast to one side because there was a lot of abuse over the last 3 years.
Sure.
And just like you said, the experience where the people that were doing the abuse aren't saying sorry, as simple as that, as funny as that might seem, like I had a lot of people pointing at me that were like, hey, what's wrong with you? You're not wearing a mask, or get the vaccine and do your part. I had people sending messages. I'm sure you've had them too. Anybody that has a page has had them where they're like, you should die. I hope you die. Like you start getting these things and it's like,
thank you.
Whoa. Like,
thank you.
Like what is wrong with you? Because there's obviously,
you're that angry with me.
Yeah, there's something wrong there. And now we had all of that happen. And, like I took a lot of screenshots of some of this stuff. I'm like, I don't know who that is. But when I walked in my car at 5:30 in the morning the next day and someone's there, it's like, I need like something here to, to be like, yeah, they said that, or this person said that. But I understand a lot of frustration and pent up energy that exists because there was no recourse for the actions that were taken, many of them unconstitutional during the last 3 years. And what I fear is that people get behind, like take a politician or something, even if it's within our political process, that we're willing to forego any values to go after a person that could be like the next Hitler, could be the next major like disruptor of the republic. We're already on shaky ground in a lot of regards, in my opinion.
Scariest time in our history, next to the Civil War.
As much as I would say I tend to agree with the people that are swinging that pendulum that way, I'm usually of the mindset to take a pause and think about it critically, because we could have somebody come along that's like, yes, it's time to punish them for what they did. And it is like it's just like a total wipeout of those people. Like could be violence, could be murder, could be whatever, could be encouraging action in sort of a vigilante way. And now you have a total disruption of the fragile system that we already exist in, which I would agree with you that it's already extremely fragile. And I don't know what you think about that, if that's a founded fear with that pendulum kind of swinging back that direction, or what your analysis is.
Our founders were fallible men, and I think sometimes we hold them in a place where they were deities. I've spent the bulk of my adult life studying most of their lives. I've visited many of their graves along the eastern seaboard here, and there's some commonalities with many of them, regardless of their wealth. They all were learned men for the most part. Some of them were not so much, but there was a commonality of this idea of civic virtue. The Romans talked about it. The founders talked about it a lot, to the fact that there was this thread through their writings, through their letters to each other. And we hear civic virtue and we think like virtue in a religious sense or even a moral sense. And there is a bit of both of those things in there, but it was more this idea that to create this place and for it to work, me as a member of it, just like an ant in an ant colony or a bee, I got a job to do and I got to do it. If I don't, somebody's got to do it for me. And I'm not suggesting that we're like a little worker bee, but like everybody's got to do something. I saw this documentary the other night where they were talking about some inner city folk, and basically, actually, this was a documentary about Appalachia, and they're interviewing people, and they were saying about a quarter of the young people even try to get jobs. And they're interviewing a kid at like a burger joint that had a job and had aspirations to go to college. And he said most of them are just on checks. And like, I knew what that meant. It meant that they were on some type of welfare program getting checks. And like, it's so common that they have like a slang for it, right? Getting my check. And that is, we are so predisposed to this type of stuff now. It's become so normal. And I don't want to make the conversation about the welfare system, but we have so removed ourselves from educating ourselves on what all of this experiment is about that if you teach your kids, you have kids? Do you have kids? But people like if you're not teaching this stuff to your children, and it's not just go to the 4th of July parade or the Memorial Day parade. I mean, there's a massive amount of information that could be passed on. If we're not doing that, then this child one day just develops this desire to learn these things. And then when they learn them, this concept of civic virtue, how do they live it out? And the idea of deeds or our acts being louder than our words is great, but if we don't do it, then who does it? And it's the founders. There was only 56 guys that signed the Declaration of Independence. A fraction of the colonies and the people in the colonies actually fought. People look back and they're like, oh, these were just like amazing people, like sitting around fires, doing all these liberty-minded things, like singing songs about a future flag. Like some of them were dirtbags. Some of them were thieves. Some of them, I mean, hell, look at Benedict Arnold. Some of them were traitors. They weren't all good people. They were just like the people in our communities. Some good, some bad, some just trying to get through the day. Hey, the British are here. I better pretend that I'm with them. Okay, the Patriots are here. I better pretend. Some of them just were trying to like do their thing. But I think we have a whole section of society that says tear all that down because some of those people owned slaves and they were pieces of shit or whatever the negative is. And then we have others that are like everything they did was basically like Moses coming off the mountain and they should be held in high regard. Like, can't we just accept that they were men and that they did some cool stuff and now here we get to sit? None of this would exist. Like none of the freaking internet probably wouldn't exist because there wouldn't have been this explosion in the universe that allowed man to do all the creating that we've done. So I have a hard time when we try to make things so clear cut because they're not. Yeah. I mean, there's times in my life that I've been a total piece of crap. And I'd love to say like I've never been a total piece of crap. I've been a total piece of crap. And if I'm capable of that, then so's everybody else in my neighborhood, right? Yeah. Which is part of like what my whole job is like, hey, there's a lot of people around you that could be like totally awesome, but from time to time they might be a total piece of shit and could be dangerous to you. Yeah. I had a guy on the way here that I don't even know what I did to him. As far as I'm concerned, nothing. I need to check the camera in my truck, but he like started road raging and flicking me off. And I'm like, I literally didn't cut you off. I didn't do anything. I didn't come in your lane. I'm like, who knows? Maybe he didn't like the color of my truck, but it was a bad day for him. Right. So I flicked him off, threw a bunch of stuff at him.
Antagonized him.
I'm just joking.
Slammed on the brakes.
I do have an idea that you could probably bring to fruition. So when guys like that come near me, a small projectile launching device comes out from the running board of the vehicle, takes aim at a rear wheel, sends a non-traceable projectile through the tire, but in a small enough manner that it leaks out, and I'm gone before it gets leaked out, not fast enough to cause the car to get squirrely, and in an area that's not pluggable.
Nice. So the ATF will definitely tell us we can't make that. So how short's the barrel again?
And I'm just joking.
It's got a pistol brace on it too. So,
but you get my point. You know, I think, and half the time we're like, we think in the good old days everything was good, and that now we're just all assholes. I think it's not, everything's not so cut and dry or clear cut. There's a bunch of horrible stories of things we've done to each other 200 years ago, 100 years ago. I just read a story on the way out here at one of my stops. Oklahoma, there's a town that's labeled the most polluted city in America. It's been shut down by the government for years. They found like lead and zinc in the ground. So it's this big mining operation, sinkholes, houses sinking, sand piles of tailings that look like mountains out in the middle of the prairie that are all full of toxic heavy metals. Kids used to go play on them. They'd come home red from the sulfuric acid, like super nasty. That was all land given to a tribe, I think from Arkansas. So was it Andrew Jackson signs the Indian Relocation Act, which meant march these people off their tribal lands and push them to wherever they're right now where we don't need, right? So they push this tribe from Arkansas up onto this ground. 50 years later, we Americans find all these metals that are worth money. Hey, can we mine? No, you can't mine. You kicked us off our home. This is ours. We don't want you to dig it up. What do? The miners go to Congress and they're like, hey, these guys won't let us mine there. And some Congress people drafted an act basically stating that these tribal elders were not mentally fit to have the conversation on whether or not they should allow mining. So they got like a court's order and they went and just raped this land, and now it is like destroyed. It's like it's a wasteland, hundreds of square miles of wasteland out there. Like that kind of stuff happened not that long ago. Like this is like the 1930s and stuff that this was going on.
That's the part that blows my mind the most, because our lives are so short. They feel long in the moment. Like as you're navigating your life, you're like, hey, I've got years and years and years. You don't know what tomorrow brings, but we kind of trick ourselves into believing we're here for a long time. When you start thinking about the things of history that happened, you start realizing that it would have been my grandparents, or, it would have been my great grandparents. Like I was around when my great grandparents were in my life for a period of time. And you think about some of these things like you're describing, they were around. It wasn't that long ago.
Yeah.
We fool ourselves into thinking that this huge amount of time has passed. I mean, you even think of the founding of this nation,
not that long.
That's not that long. And now you could get into Europe and you could get into some other countries where they've been around for, there's castles that were there from the 1300s or something. And then you kind of start saying, yeah, that's pretty long. That's pretty cool. But in our nation, those grievances, those horrific things that happened are very fresh. They're not that far reserved. And and people are capable of doing really good and really bad. You can go really quick right back into those horrible events. Society can collapse into this groupthink and like non-logical approach to this nation. We could sort of dissolve into that, or we can pursue what I like to think of being more personally excellent, which doesn't mean that you are excellent. It means that you're pursuing a higher level of living your life with a purpose. But yeah,
that's hard.
Right.
It's not impossible, but it means that when you get up in the morning, you choose to do that thing. And so for most people, it's just.
Yeah. Do you think that's what's stopping many people from. Let me sort of define that real quick so that we have something to frame this off of. We talk a lot about the personal excellence side of things in our company. Every Tuesday we have a call.
Is that how you got that sweet haircut?
No, I did that for you.
Okay, looks good.
I wanted to look good for you, Mick. Do I look good?
Excellent.
Awesome. Out. You look good too.
Thank you.
I know this is going to be such an awkward reel. They're going to break this out. No, keep it 6. 6 out of 10.
I'm quiet. Keep going. You piss excellence.
No. But what we talk about a lot is we want to impact our community in a positive way. Now, I know that we have our lens of the world. So naturally, there's not everybody's going to agree with what we think of the idea of a better world. I think most people probably do and should consider some of the points we talk about. But what we talk about on our team is in order to affect people outside your circle, I think first you have to affect inside yourself, your family unit, and start building out from the people that you're around. So I used the example of my family recently. If I can't lead my family well, how do I have the right to speak into culture in any way, shape, or form? That doesn't mean I'm perfect. It doesn't mean I can't make mistakes and still be an example. But the same thing with our team and same thing with my companies. If we can't exist with a cultural health of some sort, we're not even going to be positioned to be taken seriously, to be an example to other people. And I know that it's contagious because it's happened to me. I've had people in my life that have pursued a higher calling. And what I mean by that is they didn't do the lazy thing all the time. They didn't just do the easy route. They didn't just work the safe job all the time. And I'm not bashing anyone that does, but they took some risks. They invested in their own knowledge or skill set or learned how to do a thing or whatever you might view success or pursuit of excellence to be. I've had people in my life do those things. I see it and it makes me want to replicate what they've done.
Sure.
Because it sort of breaks down a wall that I thought was there that was like an impossibility. I can't do that. Well, you start seeing someone in your circle doing the thing you think you can't do. And you start realizing that most people, I would say, that do something that's very impactful or they're very successful did the same thing every day. And they took a step and a step and a step and a step. And it wasn't this like revelation of I'm going to do something amazing today and become the next freedom fighter or the next person to do some crazy feat. It was just the repetition of doing the right thing over and over and over again. And I just wonder if people in general, in every community, I don't care where they're from, did something to that level where they lived a life of purpose and it was evident to other people what kind of an impact that might have on the community. And I don't know because I don't see everything every corner.
So that's culture, right? The Ku Klux Klan thought that they were doing something for their community, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So like what morality or religion or the lack thereof, like North Korea or someplace like that, East Berlin, when the wall was still up, there's culture that drives things. There's a reason people ban churches, and it's not because maybe they don't like churches. It's because there were crazy things that religious people did in the name of religion. So then that pendulum goes the other way, right? Like no Catholicism, only Protestants. No Protestants, only Catholicism. Because some Protestant guy did some weird stuff or some Catholic dude did some weird stuff. Yeah. So we like, I love food. When I meet an adult that comes to my home for dinner and I'm like, hey, do you want a blah, blah? Oh, I don't eat those. You don't ever eat them? Like, are you allergic to them? No, when I was a kid, I tried them. They're disgusting. You're 55 years old. You haven't eaten a lima bean since you were 10 or whatever it is. Nope. You won't even try it? Like, maybe it's delicious. Fuck that. I'm not putting that in my mouth. Like that's weird to me. Like but people once bitten, right? I'm never going near that thing again. That made me feel a certain way. So you got people are like that and then they don't try new things. But the point of excellence, if it hurt me or made me feel a certain way, I failed, or people laughed at me, or my family or friends told you, why bother? You're only going to fail. And then you didn't like how that felt. So you pause because you're cheap ass and your lights break.
Yeah.
Now you got it going again.
See that you were supposed to just keep rolling with that.
I did. I just kept rolling. I mean, that was on purpose. But here in the community we're in, you have sects of people, S-E-C-T, that left Europe, came here, Amish, Mennonites, et cetera, to live there because they're like, this is how to live. I don't know if that's how to live, but to them it is. And to them, they think that we live the wrong way, right? So it's so subjective. So we have to agree on something. So like zoning, I was the de facto guy and still kind of am in my community. He decides he buys a farm on the edge of town. And next thing you know, the neighbor calls because him and his buddies are shooting clay pigeons every frickin' Saturday morning at 8 a.m. and her baby can't sleep. Well, cops come out and they're like, well, it's totally lawful for him to do that because he's far enough away, and they look at all the zoning laws and there's no ordinance, which is true if is in an area that this is correct. So now what's it come down to? Like being a good neighbor, and this happens all the time. F her. She's an annoying bitch. She doesn't want me to exercise my Second Amendment rights. Well, what if I was a diesel mechanic, and I built like race trucks that are like blowing black smoke in the air, and you know how loud that can be, and I love it and I'm passionate about it. Or I build Harleys, so Saturday morning I'm out there revving a Harley, and it's just being like a good neighbor thing. So I would call these guys up and I'd say, hey man, here's what's going to happen. This chick's going to keep calling the cops are going to keep coming out because they got a phone call, and then when that doesn't work, she's going to hire a lawyer. And the lawyer is going to tell her she can't do anything. So he's going to say the only thing you can do is file a grievance. And then a county board member that hates guns is going to try to pass a law or an ordinance in the county that makes what you're doing illegal. And it happens every year or two. Mm-hmm. So then as soon as that gets, the only way they can do it is make a noise ordinance.
Right.
And that's just in my community, like the way it's worked. So we fight it. And eventually it's like, dude, everybody in the county hates you now because you're making this thing. Can you just like go take them a gift certificate for dinner so that the day you're shooting, like they can at least get a nice steak? I shouldn't have to do that. It's my right. And that, I think, illustrates the point perfectly. It is your right to do that. It's also her right to enjoy Saturday morning with her kids sleeping. She bought 10 acres. You bought 10 acres. You're both in the country. Your exercise of your freedom is pissing her off and her exercise of her freedom. I used to have this beautiful place, kind of like your guys' range, that I would shoot, and a guy moved in that's like a retired college professor, and we'd go out there and just shoot a little bit. He'd call the cops. He's like a mile as the crow flies, but the sound travels. And so the owner's like, hey man, I just don't want problems with my neighbors. Cool, I get it. And I said, hey, why don't I go talk to this guy? And then like the once every 6 months we come out here, we'll let him know. I'll bring him a couple bottles of wine, whatever, I'll find out what he likes. And it's not about bribing people. It's about just being a good person. I had a guy that moved in next to me that was a lovely human that had the noisiest freaking motorcycle ever that apparently needed to warm up for 30 minutes every morning before work. He rode it to work like 10 months a year. He'd back it. Is that you? It'd be like 3:30 in the morning. And he had to like an hour drive, and he had to be at work at like, some ungodly hour. He ran a dealership. He'd back this thing out, and then he'd wrap it a few times, and it would shake the whole house. I mean, it's like some super souped up like twin Harley or whatever. And it was like, I went over there one day. I'm like, I appreciate you. And then of course, when he'd leave the neighborhood, like 8,000 RPMs up the hill, and every day it was like an alarm clock. It was like a rooster in the living room. Like, you're an asshole, right? It's not 7:30 where it's like questionable. It's the middle of the freaking night, right? It's like 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. So that whole idea of being a good citizen, he's paying his taxes. He's getting out of bed. He's going to work. His kids are going to school. He keeps his yard clean. Like, he's doing everything. But this one freaking thing he does annoys everybody. Or like open burning. I'm just using these as an example. So we end up with zoning laws because you like to burn all your leaves on a windy day because it's your only day off, and now you just lit my house on fire. Or my kids got asthma and your leaves are blowing in my house. Like, all these laws only exist because people are unpolite and discourteous. Yeah. I've got a friend back in Ohio that has a neighbor that's got a small dairy farm. He scoops up all the manure. He's got like 2 pieces of property, and he stockpiles all the cow poop in like an area like as big as your parking lot. So by the time a couple months goes by, I mean, there is semi-truckloads of shit, and it gets hot and there's flies all over it. And then every once in a while he trucks it out of there. He's completely legal to do it. But it's like, dude, you're literally moving it so that you don't smell it next to like 5 homes. It's weird. But that is why zoning laws and environmental laws and all that stuff exists. And you and I are like, F this. I should be able to go in my backyard and enjoy it as I see fit. We do automotive stuff. I'm out there spraying paint and it's blowing into the neighbor's yard and sticking all over the windows. That didn't actually happen, but just stupid things like that are why all of this shit exists. So like the pursuit of excellence also should be like understanding other people have cares, feelings, etc.
Yeah, I think that's valid. I think there's that stupid example that I don't think it's the all-encompassing example, but you always see it in these memes where they show like an empty parking lot and there's that one shopping cart that somebody just couldn't. Yeah, I don't think it's a good example of like who can hold a republic. But you always see that meme where they're like, hey, you can't even put your cart back. It does point to one thing. There's a lot of laziness. There's a lot of selfishness because we're humans.
Right.
And going to your point, we don't put the shopping cart back because we're lazy in that moment, which does show a piece of our character in some way, shape, or form. Now, there's also the grace side of things.
I just spent $318 on groceries. Pick my cart up.
I mean, that's true.
I do put my cart away.
I guess that's fair, but I guess I'm speaking to a sort of this courteous aspect where if we're not even willing to see other people for where they're at, that we're not even willing to be respectful in any way, shape, or form. I agree with what you're saying. The result of that is going to become more authoritarian existence in your community. And quite frankly, it pisses me off because there's like, I have this desire to see a reality where you can quite literally do what you want as long as you aren't doing the things that you're talking about, where you are infringing on the safety of others, the freedom of others, the sanctity of their life, the ability for them to pursue their life. And there are a lot of gray areas where I know that you can't just put a black line right there. And then ultimately that's where we're supposed to have our systems in place to, by the will of the people, create the things that we want.
This is why people end up in Alaska or Nevada in the middle of BFE where they've got no neighbor for 20 miles. That's why people go do that.
Right. Yeah. And maybe some people forget that you can do that if that's the ultimate.
Your point you just made about like not being capable of understanding other people, if you are not willing to do that and say, okay, like how would my actions affect Jared or his family or my neighbors? Should I not, or let me rephrase that. How can I expect that person to do the same for me if I'm not willing to do that for them? Like, so you should all accept me as I am, but I don't need to try to do the same for you. I mean, that's just the most obtuse and ignorant and asinine way you could possibly live.
So where does the balance sort of get struck? Because the one reality we know is when you make laws, it's very difficult to take a thing that is solidified into law and remove it. It does happen. We see it happening.
The Volstead Act, prohibition.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. I mean, that's a good one. I mean, but how did that? That's where I get into an interesting topic where let's talk about that for a second. At what point does civil disobedience in some aspect, at what point is that required to change the law versus
look at pot, like weed now, like is it legal here?
Medicinally, recreationally, no. Although if you go to certain cigar shops that sell, if you see signs for Delta 8, which is like the synthetic, weird, nasty version of THC, I think there's almost always marijuana there.
Okay. I just mean like there's like a certain, like,
hook you up,
there's something there where it's like such pushback that states have, it's become very normal. I didn't mean to derail you, but.
No, but it's funny because there's a funny story around this that maybe we'll go into off the podcast. I don't think it's worth doing it on the podcast.
You got a Delta 8 problem?
No, I will never touch that stuff because
after that one time,
it never left my system. 14 days later, it came back. Just hit me out of the blue. No, that stuff scares me. I've never been drunk, which is, I don't know, like something
you want to hang out tonight?
Kind of proud. See, I know how to keep a limit, and I don't like being out of control of my thoughts, how I act.
Sure, I appreciate that.
So like things like
I'm just not sure about how my feelings are going to run amok.
Right. You know, I could get a little wild out there, Mick. We don't even know. We don't know what I'm capable of because we haven't seen it yet. It's like those mushrooms. So here's a funny story. I found mushrooms in the woods and I used this little app to figure it out. They're 100% magic mushrooms. 100%.
Did you eat them?
No, I didn't.
Make a little tea?
I thought about it, but I didn't. I don't know how you eat magic mushrooms, to be honest.
Put them in your mouth, chew it up, and swallow it.
I read this funny statistic that was like, so there's a lot of look-alike mushrooms that you have like these edible ones. A lot of them you have to cook a certain way to change chemical compounds. All this weird crap I don't understand. But then they have these like look-alike mushrooms that are poisonous. And there's like this threshold with these poisonous mushrooms where if you eat over a certain amount, you have a 50% death rate.
Jeez.
Like a 50% chance of death. Yeah, so I didn't eat those magic mushrooms, man.
I wouldn't have done it either.
Yeah. But it also goes back to that not wanting to feel out of control of my body.
Couple beers and I'm good.
Yeah. See, I would rather have a nice, like a quality cigar with maybe a small glass of whiskey with my friends. That's nice. That's my thing. But
by a glass, you mean like one of them quart mason jars?
Talking like an eyedropper because I'm a lightweight. You know, you got to have a little bit of whiskey in there.
Spritz.
Just a little bit. It's the voice. It just every time.
I think it's conversation. You know, like this is the stuff that we try to get young guys to think about. You talked about you're going to die. Life is short. And you can like live pretty well and then do one or two stupid things. And then that's what you're remembered for. Not that our goal should be to be remembered per se, but like, that's it. Like that's the dude that rapes kids, or that's the guy that, you know, stole the such and such, you know, money from those investors. Like you make, and that's, of course, those are crimes, but that's the guy that's Bob. He's always late.
Yeah.
You know, or that's John. He's the guy that's always stinks. He can't shower, right? I don't want to be Stinky John or late Bob, but people, I think, just get so mired in the day-to-day bullshit of life, just riding the waves and watching the tide come in and out, that they never even think about the broader stuff.
I talked on our podcast recently. I do these J-Talk episodes. It stands for Jared's Take on Culture. So it's literally just things that I am seeing right now and stories that come to me and stuff I've learned through the business journey the last 8 years. And I talk about them. They're usually like 8 minutes, 9 minutes, super short episodes. But I talked about one recently. It was a story my grandfather told me. He's a Vietnam veteran. And for anybody listening, you can just go watch that. You can watch that episode and kind of get the full gist. But he was invited to speak at a Memorial Day parade. And so I went and I filmed him giving his, you know, rundown of what his experience was during Vietnam. And he was 19 or 20 when he was shipped over. Young dude. And what most would probably say is just not a boy, but, you know, just getting into manhood, you know, 19 years old. But he said this part of a story where, you know, there was this one battle, this one night, he was the only one that wasn't shot in his unit.
What branch was he in? The Army?
He was in the Army, yeah. And he would be essentially brought in on helicopter. They would go into like jungle terrain. They'd drop like the Agent Orange and do all the nasty crap, clear out the jungle, and then essentially try to pinpoint and wipe out the enemy strongholds that were in there. But this one battle that went down, something stuck in my mind, and it was just this little sentence that he said. They were set up at night, a massive firefight broke out, and they had turned, essentially the American soldiers had put claymores out around the perimeter that were remote detonated or able to be remotely detonated. They set up in daylight for their camp, so the Viet Cong saw that, at night descended upon the camp, turned the claymores towards the Americans. So as soon as the American soldiers started popping off their claymores, they killed themselves. So most of his unit would have been wiped out immediately, but the way that the VC started the firefight was lobbing grenades into the camp. So my grandfather woke up to just the sounds of like clanging metal and grenades popping off. Well, at one point, the medic was running towards my grandfather and a grenade landed next to my grandfather and the medic jumped on it and he died. My grandfather was saved. My grandfather walked away as the only one that wasn't shot that night. Now, I don't think everybody died in the unit, but he was the only one that wasn't injured in a major way.
Wow.
my entire existence was this close with one grenade, that every single thing that I'm building right now may have never happened.
Sure.
And I tried to describe that in that podcast of like what that felt to me, because I'm 31. I've gone this far in my life and realized as I'm hearing my grandfather like tearing up telling this story, I was this close to my mom not being alive, which means I'm not alive, my kids aren't alive, and my entire lineage that goes from me forward, gone. And every one of us has that. The cool thing is,
I was about to say, every one of us has.
Right. And it may not even be that crazy of a story.
Your kid. My dad crashed a motorcycle one day, right? Yeah. Like every one of us have 100 of those stories.
Like we have no right to exist, and we didn't do anything. I'll be clear about that. We don't have this inherent,
it's not owed to you
guarantee,
to be here.
Right?
Yeah.
It's not, our existence isn't owed, and I did nothing prior to my existence to deserve the ability to live now.
The spark of life ignited, and here you are, and you did nothing to make it so.
But like, what a powerful moment at 31 years old when I finally, like, it clicked to me, like, there was a lot of that for the last however many thousands of years that my family has existed up until this point, that you could have tracked. Like, that guy almost died, and if he didn't make it, this whole thing wouldn't have happened, and they almost didn't get together, and if that didn't happen, this whole side of your family wouldn't have happened. How small so many problems start to see when you realize that your life is just a boop, and then it's snuffed out. And like you said, you could be remembered for being the smelly Dave or the weird whatever.
Late Bob.
Yeah, late Bob.
You ever seen the logo for S12? That's the chain link.
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole point of that logo. That's the whole premise, is based on a similar story in my life. And you're this little link in this, and it might not even be a bloodline.
Yeah.
Because people are adopted or whatever, but your actions live on. Somebody hears this podcast and says, man, I'm going to start cutting my hair like that guy's. It looks so nice. And then maybe he meets a chick because he's got a sweet haircut like yours. And then they make a kid that cures cancer because of your freaking haircut.
You know what? If you change your haircut, whoever's listening or watching, because of me, and then you go on to do something amazing, tell Mick and rub it in his face.
No, I'm saying for real. But that's the point I'm making, is it might not be, I raised my sons to be these good men and they're heroes. Mm-hmm. And it might just be that maybe you were nice to the neighbor kid and nobody was nice to the neighbor kid, and he had some asshole abusive parents, but that kid remembered something you said or did that affected him in a positive way. And he went on to maybe be a good dad. Yeah. He went on to make kids that were good people, that become cops and firemen and librarians and all. That's how the world changes, is what always changes, but that's how it changes in a good way. So that's what that symbol, the intent of that is, which we actually talk about at the end of every class with students. But it's cool to hear you say that. It's sometimes guys are like, did you smoke a bunch of weed? Like after I talk about it, like, and then like we might not even be here, right? Like,
some soul search.
It's like, no, but like that's really what it's all about. Like,
and it's a simple concept, but one that is overlooked.
You could go easily down a rabbit hole where everything's all cosmic-y, but somebody still has to cut the grass, and you still gotta, do all the mundane business of life at the same time. But I think we can do those things and appreciate, like, one day I'm not going to cut the grass. I'm going to be dead. One day I'm not going to clean the gutters out or change my kid's dirty diaper, and find joy in those menial tasks, because they're the sum of our life. Whether we're always looking for like the big things, the vacation, Christmas pictures, like the birth, the graduation, but like all those other millions of. I was with a friend the other day, and how did he phrase it? He's going through some stuff relationship wise, and his point basically was like washing dishes after dinner or folding clothes. That's the business of life. And if you can't enjoy that stuff with your partner or spouse or significant other, like, what's the point? Like, if you only enjoy the meal and not shopping for the groceries and cleaning up the dishes, like, why be with the person? Like, if it's just these high watermarks that we find joy in or pleasure or whatever it is.
I think that's why I have a lot of interest in when you present a point, because there's always, I don't even know how to say it necessarily, but there's always this in-depth reasoning behind the things you say. At least it comes across like that. You'll present a point, but there's a logical analysis as to why that point exists. You don't typically have like, I mean, some people might say it, but you don't really have like emotional tirades where, I mean, I think sometimes you might have an emotional
I have an emotional tirade?
You are an emotional tirade.
I am
not. No, I guess what I'm saying is like, you kind of said at the beginning, there's times where we disagree, where you'll present something and I just don't agree with it. And that's fine. And I'll jar you sometimes, but you have a unique way of presenting it, I think, that makes me think, which is refreshing in a lot of ways. You. And I like being around people like that, especially when we have a slight different viewpoint because of the things that you talked about.
I agree.
But how does, what I'm curious about, we didn't talk at all about even what you do with your company. I do want to touch on that a little bit here as we're kind of getting toward the end, but how does your worldview or the core of who you are, the DNA that makes you up, how does that affect how you operate your business, and why do you do the things that you do?
So I think most people that do what I do, which is teach people some type of combative art, often start for the wrong reasons. Maybe myself included. Years ago, I mean, who wouldn't want to get paid to teach people to shoot guns or do karate or something? Mm-hmm. Like, what do? I teach people to shoot guns. I'm a badass, right? I'm not a badass.
Karate and guns.
I have no military service or law enforcement service, which doesn't necessarily mean somebody has the ability or right to do the things I do. Murder has visited my family on several occasions, and unfortunately, just this last year, I lost a friend who was murdered. He's been out here with me. Freaking horrible story. But that guy was the 7th person that I've known in my life that was murdered. And it's not like I knew a guy who lived across town, who I met one time. Like, these were people I knew, completely random, unconnected. And I don't think it's cosmic or anything like that. I think it's just freaking random that a bunch of different people I know died in violence. And, I was in the construction business. My mindset, I was a hunter safety instructor. I love our history. I love our culture in America, the good parts of it. I love the concept of being able to protect life, because all the things we're talking about don't matter if you're dead. And so I very simply teach people to use guns in an efficient and safe way. Not safe like don't point it at your head. That goes without saying. I mean, don't shoot the wrong person. Don't shoot the wrong thing. I don't have any earth-shattering information that's not available. We try to have fun with it and push people way farther than most people will in the couple of days we're together. And the concept that I have is quite simple. I take it from my friend Paul Sharp: help good people be dangerous to bad people, period. Mm-hmm. I've done some criminal activities in my life. It doesn't make me feel like some people that have done some criminal stuff are like almost proud to say that. It doesn't make me proud to do some criminal shit. Mm. But coming from a predominantly good area and being capable of doing some criminal stuff is a constant reminder to me that any one of you is capable of doing some nefarious activities, be it selling some weed, breaking into a car, doing some kind of stupid crap like that. And I knew some pretty dark individuals that had no reason to be that way. They didn't grow up a certain way. They just chose to do some bad stuff. I don't think that any of this stuff is out of the realm of, or rather out of what most people are capable of. In fact, I think the people that are far from capable are the ones that need it the most, right? I'm not training to use a firearm against some 5'3", 100-pound woman. I'm training to use it against some guy that I physically can't fight because he's bigger or stronger or badder than I am. So There's a mindset component to it. And that's kind of what we do, like let's expose people to these concepts. And I've been a student for years of some of the best people in this space, which doesn't mean I have the right to just go teach this stuff. I've spent years doing it. I've got the support of some really good people, which is cool. And I'm honored to be able to do it. So there's a lot of very good people in this space these days. 20 years ago, there wasn't. It was very hard to find anybody. There's a lot of charlatans in this space that don't know what they don't know, right? Like, because you can roll paint doesn't make you a painting contractor. Because you can weld a line between two pieces of steel doesn't make you a welder. And that, I think, is a problem. Like, I shoot pretty good, thus I'm going to teach people this stuff. Yeah. Even like why I travel around with a trailer full of your targets. You go to ranges and they have all kinds of dangerous or unusable training apparatus, from target stands to steel to whatever.
Right.
People don't think about that. Like, whatever, man, I'll just show up and we'll do some stuff. Well, not only might it be unsafe, it just might not be like a good way to go about the training. So I take things very seriously when need be, and then we try to have fun when that's allowed.
So what does a normal class look like for you? Like, what is the objective in most of your classes?
To build repeatable, robust, and reliable systems inside of the head and subconscious of the individual. I think that too often we come to the training with too flippant a desire or no specifics. I just want to shoot better, define better. Well, more accurate, define more accurate. How far is the target? How big's the target? I want to shoot faster. Okay, how fast, how far, how many times, and what time frame? We can't define things, and why? Why do you want to have 0.17 splits with your pistol? Well, because it's fast. Do you need that to protect yourself? Well, maybe if I have to. No, you probably don't. And if we look at the totality of violence, and do you need to shoot that fast? No. Is it wrong? No, it's totally cool. Do that. But why are you doing this thing?
Yeah.
So the concept is very much dedicated to the idea of, will this support me winning in violence? Will this support my family winning in violence? Will this support me not having a negative outcome and ending up cuffed up and locked up? Will this support me not having my family stripped of their home and me of my job? Which a lot of it means, when the guy flicks me off today, smile and say, I'm sorry, even though I did nothing wrong, because I don't want to get in a fight on the side of the road. Because even if I'm a tough guy with guns or know how to fight a little bit, he might run me over, right? You don't know these things.
Yeah, it always blows my mind when you see the road rage incidents where you see someone pull over, whoever's the aggressor, I don't know, but like someone gets out and gets in front of the vehicle that they're yelling at and screaming. I'm just like, oh man.
Silly.
If that guy just put his foot down just a little bit,
right,
now you're 4,000 pounds of hamburger underneath it.
Dumb.
That's what I think is interesting about what you do. The way you present stuff, I think it's needed for sure. I think.
Thank you.
There's, I'm friends with a lot of people in the gun industry, and there's a whole lot of different opinions, and you see it getting thrown around all over the place. Like, which is the right way? Who does this thing better? Who is the right one to say this thing?
Yeah.
I usually don't get too involved in it because, like, I have a piece of what we do in the industry, but it's largely to give people the tool to train on.
Sure.
But I think that there's this refreshing reality that there is more and more of what you're describing, where someone like you is coming to the table with a realistic approach, not sensationalizing violence, not just putting off this aura of, oh, I did all these things and I'm trying to scare people into following me. Because I've gone to classes where the first 45 minutes, I swear the instructor was just trying to scare people into following him, where like all this bad thing, like every bad thing that could ever happen to you is now just like shoved at you. And like I'm watching people around like, oh snap, what's happening here? Like there's a non-productive and there's a productive aspect. And I think it depends on what the objective of the class is.
Yeah. Which, if I'm trying to learn long-range precision shooting, let's go train that.
Yeah.
If I am trying to learn a safe and effective way to have a gun around my kids so that if some bad person comes into our space and tries to hurt us, whatever that looks like, at church, at school, at the gas station, I have an answer to that. Even though that answer is a tiny, slim thing, the outcome of me failing is such a great weight and such a high cost that I can't fail, or I'm going to practice this thing enough. I could be really terrible at basket weaving and make a whole room full of shitty baskets, and who cares, right? I could be the worst dad on the barbecue and ruin every steak and make every burger a hockey puck, and my kids will be like, oh God, Dad's grilling, this is going to suck. Other than wasting food, there's no bad outcome. I could be really crappy at paying attention to what's going on, really crappy at that kind of stuff, and allow my family or myself to become a victim of violence. And then the outcome is I'm done. That's the end of it. Like, no more bad burgers, no more shitty basket weaving. And people say, well, that's such a low probability. It is. But the outcome of that highly improbable event, it could be forever.
It's costly. Yeah.
Or it could be having an ostomy bag hanging out where you're pooping in a bag the rest of your life. It could be paralysis. It could be a lot of things. Just because you get in a fight doesn't mean you're going to die.
Yeah.
So I think it's something that's worth noting. And in this space, there's just as many charlatans and idiots as there are good people. And so you should ask, like, why am I doing this? What is the outcome I'm trying to get out of it? What information, what problem am I trying to solve? Hey, let's make a new target. Cool. What's it going to do?
Right.
Like, I don't know. Well, what am I designing it? What solution am I creating? What problem am I making go away? I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, then just shoot that piece of metal scrap on the floor then, right? Like, we're good if we got no...
We actually get that. I'm not going to go too deep in that, but I get that quite a bit, where people are like, why don't you build this target or X, Y, Z, you name the target. Why don't you do this particular target? And quite frankly, it's often because there's not necessarily a training aspect to that particular target. I don't see value in that particular thing. Not that
they just look at it like this would be neat to have. Right.
Yeah. So kind of coming to the end here, something I close out podcast guests with is just a question. And
yes,
I'm just done. We're done again. Yes, it is. The answer is yes. Final answer. Here.
Trying to be serious.
I can't sometimes with you, Mick, but on the topic of culture, kind of closing out this podcast.
I'm listening.
If you had to prescribe something, okay, to the culture, and I'm talking American culture right here. If you had to say, here's some things that I would prescribe to our nation to see our republic become stronger, see, our nation as a whole to become, I don't know what even the word is, more effective, more cohesive. I'm not saying everybody's agreeing with the same things, but if you had to lay out sort of a couple points that you think that our society should hone in on to have a more well-rounded nation, what do you think those things would be?
I do like 3, 4, 5 things. One, identify what kind of person you want to be. If you died today, and this isn't, if I died, what would they say about me so that I knew I was like, had good things. No, if you died right now and your friends wrote a eulogy, I just lost a couple people in the last few months, and there was a few of them that I was like, that's sad. He was a nice guy.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with being a nice guy. It wasn't that I needed to say, this is the greatest man of all time, and he did all these amazing things. But you meet Joel? Did you meet Joel Gupton?
Yeah, I did.
Joel,
yeah.
Our friend Joel passed a couple years ago, and I could sit and fill a ream of paper with writing about what Joel's life meant to me or to others. Do you need that? No. But what is it? And it's not, this is often misinterpreted. You drive past a cemetery and there's little stones, and then there's always one big one, Mr. Smith or whatever, that's like, I've got to be remembered. And they got some 50,000 pound piece of granite. That's not what I mean. I mean, what is it? What is it that you were here doing? I think it was Ralph Waldo Emerson. I don't want to butcher the quote, but basically he said the purpose of living is not to be happy, but it's to be useful. There's a bunch more to the quote. It's to do something of value for the world, to live in a way that there's some good subjective, right? But what does that mean to you? And I think too often we get too mired in, I got to work, I'm trying to pay the bills, I'm trying to chase my career. And then all of a sudden everybody's like, crap, the kids are grown and gone. That's what they know dad as. Dad worked really hard. Mm-hmm. Great. And then what do kids do? They go work really hard. The Cat's in the Cradle, the song, right? Like, when you coming home, son, I don't know when, right? Like, now the kid's like, or the dad's going, son, you want to go like hang out, go fishing? Like, I can't, Dad. I'm doing exactly what you did. I'm working my ass off. Yeah. So I don't mean to get just on that, but figure out what you want to be. Write it down. We can't hit a piece of steel that we can't see. You got to identify what you want. Second thing, I would study our history. Good, bad, right, wrong. I study the world history, but study ours too. Men like John Glover. If you don't know who John Glover is, shame on you. Or Henry Knox. If you don't know who Henry Knox is, shame on you. And I didn't know who they were till I studied on them. John Glover. If it wasn't for John Glover, there'd be no America. If it wasn't for Henry Knox, there'd be no America. Two names that like we don't, and that's just two of many that were like these pivotal figures. Knox was a bookkeeper. I tell this story all the time in podcasts. He was a bookkeeper that was responsible for getting the guns from Fort Ticonderoga. He was responsible for setting up those guns in pushing the British fleet out of Boston Harbor during the siege of Boston. A bookkeeper, not a soldier, he learned how to use the cannons from reading. That's what America was made by, was men like that. He marched from Boston through the mountains all the way to Fort Ticonderoga on Lake Champlain in the dead of winter, hundreds of miles through frozen forests, crossing creeks and such to get thousands of pounds of cannons. That's a person whose name we should remember, but that man didn't write the history books. And if we don't know who those guys are, how can we look up to them? How can we look at the lessons that they passed on? I think that is something of value. I think the last thing, it would be deeds, not words. One of our T-shirts and logos is facta non verba. Deeds, not words. It's so easy to wax eloquent about all this stuff. Like, Nike, just do it, or crush everything, and all these like cute things. What are you crushing? Are you getting out of bed and showing your kids you're not a fat sack of shit? And actually, like, do they see you out in the backyard doing push-ups? Do they see you lifting weights and making better choices with food? Do they see you being kind to people that maybe don't deserve it? Do they see you living in that manner? Because if not, you're just full of shit. And I think if we are not able to emulate any of that stuff in ourselves, how can we talk about the greater good of society? It's nonsense. It's foolish. And so if we can't do it with ourselves, then who else? If not me, then who? Yeah. I think that'd be my, and to close out my point, I am a piece of shit that fails every day in some way. So never do I want anybody ever to think like, oh, that guy thinks he's awesome and, is got rosy smelling poop, which I do if I get into the rose bushes, but that's not what I'm talking about.
I appreciate that, Mick. That's a question I like to kind of end it with, because we all have a different lens. We come from different backgrounds, have different stories. And because of that, it kind of shapes different answers from the people I've had on the podcast as to what they would prescribe. But I appreciate you jumping on the podcast.
I appreciate you guys spending the time to set this up and have me on the podcast.
Yeah. Well, the last thing I want to do real quick, I have a couple gifts that I'm going to give you.
Is that paper towels? What are we doing with the paper towels?
So those can be yours if you'd like.
Pretty real.
Just remember COVID. That's all I got to say. Remember when that was a precious metal. No, the box first. Let's hand in the box. So I know you occasionally will have a nice cigar. So I got you.
This is too funny because I told you when I got here that I brought you guys cigars. So we've got the Sticky Sweets.
Because I think of you as a Sticky Sweet.
Sticky Sweet. We've got the Cocoa Blues.
Cocoa Blue. So those are a joke.
Okay, I see that. But these are actually
Those are actually legit.
This Cohiba can go in the crapper, and I'll wear I'm going to start with a Sticky Sweet. And then what other one?
Sticky Sweet. You're a
That's very nice.
So that's that. Let's do the big bottle there, Josh. So,
Thank you.
Because I think, when I think of you, I think of Florida Georgia
Bacardi
Line.
Black, baby.
So I think of Florida Georgia Line every time I think of you. So it's like a bad country song, a little hip hop, but not quite country.
And I hate that kind of stuff, right?
I know.
I like real country, like Alabama, Travis Tritt,
but
Jerry
the
Reed.
Bacardi. I just saw it and I was like, that's it.
So if I drink half of this before I get up in the next 30 seconds, do I win anything?
No.
Okay, I won't do that. Thank you.
And then there's one other little bottle here that.
Ooh, that's a good one.
I just as a thank you for jumping on the podcast.
Thank you very much.
I've actually never had larceny.
We could sell this and get you a functioning light.
Could we? I don't think so.
He thought that was funny. Thank you so much. It's funny because I brought you guys cigars and some brown liquor. I didn't bring you anything high end like that.
I don't know if I'd call Bacardi Black high end, but I mean,
I've actually
for some people maybe
been by their factory.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
So you're gonna tell me that I should actually go into their factory?
I think it was a good tour, if memory serves. I think their main factory is in Puerto Rico.
Okay.
I believe.
To be honest, I've never had Bacardi ever. I've never had tequila either.
Yeah, Puerto Rico. Tequila's a fave.
I almost bought you a bottle of tequila, but I wanted your clothes on.
This is all just body paint. I've been naked this whole time. The only thing real are these Victo shoes. The rest of it's just body paint.
You would too.
Wouldn't that be cool if right now I grabbed a paper towel and just wiped it off and it was just nothing but hair?
It'd be really awesome if the podcast just went boop. Well, Mick, I appreciate you coming out here and hanging out with us. I appreciate your friendship and what you do.
Thank you.
And, I hope you have a good class.
It's going to be awesome. 5 days of bliss.
You'll be on the
range. Supposed to be in the 90s.
Yeah, it'll be a good time. So,
I love it.
Anyway, I know you got places to be, people to see, so appreciate you.
Thank you.
And we'll have you on some other time.
Thank you, man.
Thank you for listening to the Exodus Companies podcast. This is a movement from a broken culture to build a new, rejuvenated community. If you want to support our growing team, the first thing that you can do is pay it forward. It costs you nothing and it ensures that our podcast is reaching those who need to hear the message the most. Share each episode, post on your socials, and always be sure to tag us. Another way that you can help support the podcast and help it to grow is to suggest topics on our YouTube channel comment section. If you didn't know, we post videos weekly on our YouTube along with the audio episodes that you're listening to now. Swing over there, hit subscribe, and make sure to leave us a comment. Lastly, shop any of our brands and consider purchasing some of our products. We don't beg you to do this, but it is necessary to sell our products to support our mission here at the Exodus Companies. We can't do this for free, so it does require our followers to support us through our products. If you feel called to do so, the amazing part is you are supporting U.S. manufacturing and U.S. employees. Your investment into us supports families here in the United States and helps us to continue to do what we are doing here at the Exodus Companies. Thank you for your continued support. There's much work to be done in the culture. We will see you all in the next episode. COVID data and how it affected different racial groups.
And hard pause for a light reset. So here at TA Targets and the Exodus Companies, we try to.
We had to choose.
I'm going to go on Amazon and order you a new one.
Had to choose between paying Brenton and Josh or buy the light this week. We chose paying the team.
You should get a paint light from downstairs.
It's just like over here sitting. But
RFK
was mentioning